My next guest is someone who I really hope you open your ears, your hearts, your minds to his story. I met him a couple years ago on stage when I had the opportunity to interview him for an event, and his story has really stuck with me, and ever since then we follow each other on Instagram. He's doing some amazing work. He is Arno Michaelis. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, he was a founding member of what went on to become the largest racist skinhead organization on earth. He was a reverend in a self-declared racial holy war. He was the lead singer of the hate metal band Centurion, and he became a single parent. That parenthood, his love for his daughter, forgiveness shown by people he once hated, all helped Arno Michaelis turn his life around, bringing him to embrace diversity and speak out against hate and violence. He is no longer a white supremacist. He fights for peace. He's waging the war for peace. Arno, welcome to Real Talk with Roshini.
Thanks so much, Roshini. I appreciate you having me on. Happy Valentine's Day.
To you, too. And I know you say you don't do a lot of interviews, so I'm honored that you're sharing your story with us today. A couple poignant things you've said to me, not on air, but when I was preparing for this conversation. You said race is a product of racism, and race is not a solution to racism. What do you mean by that?
Well, when I called myself a racist, when I was an active white nationalist from 1987 to 1994, I also described myself as racially conscious. That was how I felt that I looked at the world. And what that meant was I looked at everyone according to race. And that was not just like the most important factor, it was the only factor in how I viewed other people and how I made decisions. And that is how I define racism, is someone who bases all their decisions on race. And as far as interacting with other people, I needed people to buy into that. If people didn't buy into race in the first place, then there's nowhere to go from there. You can't be racist until you accept the concept of race. And if you look at the history of the concept of race, it wasn't like this objective, neutral fact of life that racists came along and exploited. Race was concocted by racists in order to perpetrate racism 400 or 500 years ago, and we all know what's happened since then. So there's really nothing more racist than race, and it's very concerning that a lot of people who are, with the best of intentions, are trying to address racism in society, but while they're doing it, they're tripling down on racial identity, which is really the foundation of racism.
All right, so what you're saying is or are you saying we can celebrate different races, but we shouldn't use racial identity to further perpetuate racism?
I don't believe that different races exist. There's a great book called Racecraft. It's written by two sociologists named Karen and Barbara Fields, who self-identify as Afro-American. And they call it racecraft to make a comparison to witchcraft. In the 1600s, if your cow wasn't giving milk, it was obviously because of witchcraft. A witch was stealing the milk. That's why the cow is not giving milk. And as ridiculous as that sounds today, that was commonly accepted, just matter-of-fact, day-to-day life for people in many places in the 1600s. And the book Racecraft very plainly illustrates, with all sorts of historical citations and very well-researched positions, that race really has no more basis in reality than witchcraft does. So I personally don't subscribe to the idea of different races. I think we can absolutely celebrate our differences, and the way to do that is to see our common humanity first. And once you understand that we have more in common than different, the differences that we have are revealed as the assets that they are, rather than something to fear. So I don't think the idea of race has any constructive place in society. It's really done nothing but harm.
I'm talking with Arno Michaelis. He now wages the battle for peace. He is the author of a couple books, one of them, My Life After Hate, and another one, which we'll get into momentarily, The Gift of Our Wounds, which he co-wrote with a Sikh man. Both Arno and his co-author there live in the Milwaukee area, and they go around the country trying to fight the ills that we're talking about today and bring peace. So, as executive director of Life After Hate and your book, My Life After Hate, give people your words and what really turned you off of the life of white nationalism.
Yeah, I am no longer affiliated with the Life After Hate organization. I resigned in November of 2012, actually. But what helped me turn around, what really opened my eyes, was when people I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. And in doing so, they destroyed this idea of racial separation and the idea of race. When someone treats you with kindness, they're connecting with you at a core human level that transcends these social constructs that really all the injustices of the world are rooted in. And so when I had experiences like a Jewish boss and a lesbian supervisor and black and Latino coworkers treating me with kindness when I least deserved it. Mind you, when this was happening, I had a shaved head, swastikas all over me. I was an outspoken racist. Typically had scars all over me at any given time. So it wasn't there. I made no bones about who I was and what I was about.
And I've seen pictures of you at that time, and you looked pretty
Right.
scary, Arno.
Yeah, it was. It was very obvious that I was a white nationalist, and yet these very brave people refused to be intimidated by that. They refused to play by my rules, which was aggression and separatism and race. And instead they said, hey, this is how a human being treats another human being. This is the world that you can live in if you can set aside all this ideological box that you put yourself in. And those examples helped to lead me to a place where I was really looking for an excuse to leave. And that happened in 1994 when my girlfriend and I broke up and I became a single parent. And a couple months after that, a second friend was murdered in a street fight after a concert my band had played at. And I realized that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter.
Yeah, I mean, that's major life events. You also co-wrote the book with Pardeep, who I also had the great fortune of interviewing with you on stage a couple years ago. And you do speak out against hate. His father was killed. He's Sikh. His father was killed in an act of racial violence in a place of worship. How has just working with Pardeep and the work you both do together, the talks you've done, how has that affected you?
I really pride myself in being a lifelong learner, and I think the only person who's taught me more in my life about just being a human being than Pardeep would be my daughter. Pardeep is just an amazing human being. He's an amazing teacher, as well as a fantastic father and husband and son. But he's just an example of how human beings can really attain a level of connection with the world around them. And he demonstrated to me the power of service to heal after trauma and also to connect people, to take people from seemingly disparate backgrounds and find a cause that everyone can agree on. And when you roll up your sleeves and start working to address that issue side by side with someone who you may not have felt kinship with before, by the time you're done with that work, you do feel kinship with them. And so that transcends the melanin levels of our skin. It transcends ideological attachments like to political poles of either pole. And that's all really an example of the Sikh faith. And so I'm a Buddhist, but I draw a ton of inspiration from all human faith, but especially Sikhi. I actually have Ikankar tattooed on my right hand alongside Chardikala. So it's and those principles are God is truth, God is one, and then an idea of relentless optimism. And so I really draw a ton of inspiration from Party personally, and also from the Sikh faith in general.
We were talking with Arno Michaelis. He is a former white nationalist who got out of that life and now speaks on peace, and he partners on some of that work with the Gift of Our Wounds co-author, Pardeep, who's of the Sikh faith. And your book, My Life After Hate, is also out there, so I recommend people check both those out. Before we say goodbye, Arno, what is your advice to people right now? Because there are a lot of conversations about race. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's unfortunately a lot of hate still left in the world.
Simplest piece of advice I could give is be about what you're for rather than what you're against. Everybody wants to be anti-something nowadays. They're anti-fascist, they're anti-racist, they're even anti-hate. I never describe myself by any of those words. I describe myself as pro-peace, pro-compassion, pro-kindness, pro-love. And so when you define yourself by what you're opposed to, you literally cannot exist without that thing. So that's why you're kind of attaching an anchor to yourself, and you're never going to get very far when you're anchored down by this negative thing that you're dedicating yourself to opposing. Whereas if you define yourself by love, by unconditional love for yourself and for other human beings and for society, there's no limit to where you can go from there. So be about what you're for rather than what you're against.
I think that is terrific, and I don't want to let this text go by. I know we're running out of time. This listener says, does this guy live under a rock? He doesn't believe different races exist, ? That's not really what I heard from you, but why don't you explain in your own words?
Sure. Well, first of all, I suggest this person read Racecraft by Karen and Barbara Fields. It'll explain exactly in detail what I mean by that. But the fact is the idea of race was concocted by racists. It's no more merit than the idea I had as a white nationalist that there's a Jewish conspiracy to kill all the white people. It's ridiculous upon that level. There are no different races of human beings. There's no scientific basis to that. We are all a single race.
The human race, when you talk about that. So you're not negating the fact that I happen to be Sri Lankan American or that Pardeep is of the Sikh faith and Indian. I mean, you're not wiping those things out.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. A common response quickly is people like, well, you're colorblind. And I'm not colorblind at all. The first thing we have to do is acknowledge that for the past 5 centuries, people have been absolutely brutalized because of their skin color, and that's absolutely wrong. And the way to address that is to stop believing that our skin color makes us more different than alike, and that's essentially what race is. So no, I don't believe in race, other than the human race. I don't believe that our skin color makes us more different than alike, and anyone who does believe that, I feel very sorry for them because they think the same way I did when I was a white nationalist.
All right, Arno Michaelis, thank you for sharing your story with us. You're so wise, and we will have you back as the year goes on. Good luck with all of your work.
Thank you, Roshini. I appreciate everything you're doing, and your voice is very important nowadays, so thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much.